The prophet is not without honor except in his own native place, among his own kin. I'm sure you've heard of Jane Goodall. Right? She was the famous, rather renowned primatologist and anthropologist, and she became famous for her work among chimpanzees. But earlier in her life, she always had a fascination and love for animals in their native environment and loved to spend time in that environment. So much so, she went on this experimental trip to Tanzania and lived among the chimpanzees and observed them and noted their every movement. It was, at the time, rather revolutionary. The methodology was not highly thought of. In fact, back homeland, she was rather poo-pawed. Nobody thought she was anybody. Her methodology was unorthodox and unapproved, and she had no formal credentials, no formal training. So all the people in the system rejected her initial findings. But Jane Goodall persevered in her vision of observation in the native environment of the chimpanzees, and indeed then from there the anthropologists of humans. She went on to be world famous, and now there's even movies made about that. I think if you've ever seen that movie, it's a stunning movie about Jane Goodall, well acted and by Sigourney Weaver, I think is. But it was a beautiful movie. But the point is that she was rejected from her own kin first. It sounds so familiar to what we hear in today's gospel of Jesus returning to her homeland. Remember, here's Jesus, who's now for several years been wandering around all of Galilee and healing people and preaching people and working miracles that have astounded people. And he comes to his hometown of Nazareth, and they sort of reject him, and they don't recognize him. It brings me to that phrase that you've often heard: familiarity breeds contempt, right? That we become so familiar with somebody that we think that, well, there can't be anything good here. I don't think it's only in Jane Goodall's time or in Jesus' time that happens. I think that happens in our own world as too. We tend to get familiar with our own surroundings, and we take things for granted. We may not have contempt in the open sense, but we certainly have become complacent, and we take for granted the gifts that are around us. I think inside our own household, for example, I mean, we forget how wonderful our spouse can be. After all, they put up with us, right? So, I mean, you may not think you're that difficult, but you might want to ask a few people. We do take things for granted. It's not that we're necessarily difficult per se, but we could definitely be a challenge. But more importantly is when your spouse, it's just the ordinary day-to-day is one thing, but when something else goes wrong and you're in need of help, if you get sick, that takes it to another level. It's usually only at those moments we tend to appreciate how much they do for us, because we aren't able to do for ourselves. But why wait till we're sick to appreciate the very gift around us? It's also true for our parents. If the young people among us, we tend to take our parents for granted. I mean, I know I did when I was a teenager, and it was only later on I realized how much that they had put out, how much they'd sacrificed for me, and how much really of a witness of being a disciple in my own life they were. It's important for us to not let familiarity to dull our senses so that we don't see well. And that's, in that way, we're called to, in a sense, open the eyes of our heart once more to see with fresh eyes, to see where we have blessings around us, where we have people who are surrounding us, who are loving us, who are showing us the way to being a disciple. I don't think it's only also in the family home. I also think it's in like a wider community like this. I think if you watch the television, you would think there's no good news anywhere. I mean, that's what they sell. It's all bad news. That's what sells, unfortunately, because that has a, what we call clickbait value, right? People want to click on that because that's what they will sell. Advertisements will sell attention. But I think our world is full of goodness. And I think our community around here in particular is full of extraordinary goodness. But it's ordinary goodness that makes it extraordinary because of the fidelity with which they do it and continuously do it. I think of many examples inside our community. I can think of several that I'm sure you could add to them, but let me just mention a few. Like, there's one woman in our community who's retired from, quote unquote, the ministry, the hospital ministry, but still goes down there. She herself probably occasionally needs to go into the hospital herself, but she's still serving and going there and bringing communion to the many, many people in the hospital, along with a whole flurry of other volunteers who faithfully bring back news of different patients and saying they might need this or that, and then we as priests go and add to that. Faithfully doing it for year after year, again, with no notoriety, just the ordinary presence of care in our community to people in their time of need. Or I think of the many St. Vincent de Paul people. Mike is always, those boxes get filled with lots of stuff. Well, somebody picks those stuff up. Somebody takes that out and brings it over to the shed, and another group of people take it from there and get it to the people in need. All, again, in the shadows. Nobody sees who they are. Faithfully been doing it for years on end. The challenge I worry about these is because they've been doing it so quietly, is we need some younger people to do that. Because they can't keep going. Eventually, we need to find some more people who are younger who will take over some of these ministries, these quiet, hidden ministries that are producing so much good. I think of the endless work that happens with Nancy and with over at the rummage sale. I'm trying to think. Thank you. And how much they've been doing, like endless, year after year after year. Again, we need more volunteers to put this on, this rummage sale, which is doing a great good for so many in the community. And again, you could add probably another 10 or more ministries. Or right now, the ministry that's down in Tijuana right now. Like there's 25 our parishioners, but there's 60 people who are down there already working in the community. Like Joan has spent weeks and months preparing for this. Again, in the background, nobody ever knows of that. But Joan Meebach does that's one of her great ministries for her, and she spends a whole time down there working in this heat. And what a great witness! What an ordinary has been turned into extraordinary because of the faithfulness and the love and the compassion with which they do this ministry. I think it's important that we look again around us to see what is extraordinary around us. What are the gifts that are here now, so that our familiarity does not breed contempt, but in fact, we open our eyes and are grateful for what is around. You see, the prophet Ezekiel and Jesus were experiencing that because of the familiarity, they were not taken seriously. They were not noticed. Let's not fall into that. Let's open our eyes and see what is among us. And let's see if we can participate. At least be recognizing for the gifts that are here, that are ordinary being turned into extraordinary. And that we can be grateful for that gift among us and be part of it, maybe to step in and to help in some way, whether that be rummage sale, St. Vincent de Paul, Tijuana, or visiting the sick, or any of the other multitude of ministries that we have. This is what we're called to do. This is what brings the gospel alive, and what brings the Eucharist alive, is that we put into action what we hear. A prophet is not without welcome or without honor in his own native place, our own kin. But let us not have our familiarity breed contempt, but rather blessings and joy. Let us look with fresh eyes and see again.